Welcome to Plant Your Seed. I'm your host, Fred Ferris. On each episode, we share stories of how ordinary people have transformed their lives. Each story is compassionate, each story is authentic, and each story is a transformation. Here are the stories of the people who are changing our world by transitioning to a plant-based diet. Today on Plant Your Seed, joining us from New Jersey, we have Laura Carney. Laura is a writer and book and magazine copy editor. Her work has been published in the Washington Post, the Associated Press, Good Housekeeping, and Runner's World, among others. She is currently writing a book about finishing the bucket list of her late father, who was killed by a distracted driver. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here on Plant Your Seed. I really appreciate it.
I always find it so funny when people say that. Thanks so much for having me on a podcast, because I wish I were there in person, but this is what you get today.
Right? During the pandemic, you get a Zoom call or a Skype call. You don't get the in-person one. We'll work on that, though.
Okay, great.
Now, before we get into your current project, I would love to start with how and why you became vegan.
Yeah, it's actually very connected to it. I always think I have a weird vegan origin story, but you spoke with my husband, Stephen Sigmund, a month ago, and he is a vegan photographer and a vegan cook. And he wasn't vegan when I met him. We've been together about almost 18 years now. He actually went vegan. I think he's been vegan maybe 10 years now. So, about halfway into our relationship. And he is the cook in the house, so I would eat a vegan dinner every night, but, during the day and the rest of the time I was still eating normally. Normally meaning like how I had always eaten. And I just was sort of resistant to making the shift all the way. I had a couple times where I tried. I would be like maybe pescatarian for a month, and that would be about how long I would last. I think maybe 3 times I did that. And I think finally what really did it for me was it was sort of this like perfect storm event where he and I went to a family reunion. And I should say that my favorite food before I went vegan, and actually still now as a vegan, is potato salad by far. And I had this like extra creamy dairy-filled potato salad I was eating. I had given up drinking completely a couple years before that. So one of the unfortunate side effects of doing that is every time I went to a party, I would just eat everything in sight because, I didn't have anything in my hands that I was drinking from. And so I was sitting there just like mawing down on this thing, as my cousin's husband so eloquently told me. And someone mentioned to me that someone that I cared about was still texting and driving. And at that time, I had been a distracted driving awareness advocate for, I think, about 3 years. And, to the point where I was on TV, I was doing radio interviews, I was in national magazines, I worked for one. So, that helped with that. But, the Washington Post story was about that because that's how my father was killed. And I really just reacted very angrily, very quickly, and almost yelled at the person. And it was in real conflict between, okay, well, do I act like an advocate in this situation, or do I act like a family member or a loved one, So I felt a lot of conflict about that. And the next day I had this advocacy event where we were actually volunteering. My mentor lost his daughter because of a distracted driver, and she was a big animal lover. So it was held at the ASPCA. They do it every year to honor her. And it was just, cleaning out cages, stuff like that. And Stephen was pretty psyched, to join me doing this. And it was pretty convenient. It just happened to be both were in Pennsylvania. They were like very close to each other. So it was a perfect situation for that weekend. And we're like, hey, our causes are uniting, And after it was over, they only had deli meats and hoagies for people to eat. So ironically, here he had been so like passionate about this, and then he couldn't eat anything. So afterwards, we went to a restaurant that I thought was only sort of half vegan, and they had other stuff too. And, my mom, like bless her, ordered a sandwich that was it was labeled tuna fish, and that's like her favorite. And it turned out that it was chickpea tuna. And like neither she nor I knew that until after she ate it. And I could tell she was just kind of shocked by it. And, it's like, I think it was sort of like all these, how like all these little things can just form in one experience and they all just start percolating. So all these little things were happening. And it was like, I got home and the next day I was really bummed out still about this, like it was almost like a confrontation I'd had with a loved one. And
You didn't confront them.
I did, but I don't want to call it that because I don't want to say I was like out of control angry because I try to just be firm.
Well, you
And
reasoned with
I
them then.
wasn't, yeah, I tried to reason with them. And it didn't go well, and I didn't like how emotional I felt about it. And I didn't like the feeling of, gosh, here I had this idea that if I just do this advocacy work and I educate people, because, I really was, as an advocate, I was learning things about what doing that does to your brain when you drive that the general public really didn't know very much about. And I wasn't looking at it as a moral issue really at all. I mean, as a journalist, it's kind of hard for me not to look at it as, this is just a matter of education. So I was under this idea that all you have to do is educate people, and then, they'll see the common sense and the logic. They'll change what they're doing. And I was really bummed out about it and thinking, well, God, I don't want to feel this way about somebody I care about. And also, I don't want to feel like I'm ineffective in my advocacy. And I talked to Stephen about it, my husband, and I said, I don't get it. I've told them the science. Why isn't that enough? And he said to me, well, I've told you the science about animal rights and factory farms and what happens to them, and you're not vegan.
There you go.
And it was like a lightning bolt hit me in the head, and I was like, oh yeah.
Right?
That's true. And it's interesting because the one of the best things that happened that entire weekend was my mom came with us for that ASPCA, the advocacy thing we did. And she met my mentor and his wife for the first time. And my mentor, his wife, Diane, was really being kind and calling me very helpful to them and a good friend to them. And my mom said, yeah, Laura really lives by her beliefs. It was like just such a kind thing to say about me. And I thought, well, she's my mom, so of course she's going to say I'm wonderful. But is that true? Like, is what she said, like, do I do that? Do I, like, I want that. I want what she said to be true. And it occurred to me when he said that, I had believed him for, however many, I think he'd been vegan for like 8 years then. I had believed him. I believed that what was happening wasn't humane, that lives were suffering needlessly, and also people's health was suffering because, like I said, I think it's a matter of education a lot of the time. So it's like, even though I believed it, I was still doing it. And I thought, well, why is that? Why would someone like me who supposedly lives by her beliefs, still say, oh, I can't do that, or it's too hard, or whatever. And I just resolved that day, okay, I'm going to go vegan completely. I've kind of been 25% of the way there. So it's not a huge stretch. It'll maybe be a little easier for me because here I've had, this live-in chef, so to speak, who has been like introducing me to these wonderful vegan foods, and my mind had already been open to the fact that I know it's not only possible but enjoyable and a good way to live. So like that wasn't even an issue for me. I think the main stumbling block for me, like I had two things. One was, am I going to miss the foods that are sort of comfort foods for me that I think I need, like, to be okay? And also, will I run as well? Because I was a long distance runner, and what really ended up happening that sealed the deal for me was Stephen had become a runner that year, and he had actually switched from, kind of more of like a sometimes processed food vegan diet to a very healthy whole foods vegan diet. And he was reading a lot about it, and he was really noticing a difference. And we were watching these documentaries about vegan athletes and seeing how, all the benefits of it. And I thought, wow, people really have misconceptions about this too. Like, I know that I did. So I just, that day I said, okay, not only am I going to go vegan today, but I'm going to train for an Ironman as a vegan. Yeah.
That day you decided, I'm just going to go and I'm going to do the Ironman thing.
Well, and then my advocacy changed forever as well that day, because up until that point, I had been someone who I would find stories online about car crashes or distracted driving incidents and share them and be like, don't do this. And, I mean, not in so many words, but that's really what
Right.
I was saying. And trying to teach people why it's not okay, and here's the reality behind it, yada yada yada. But it's like I was starting to feel frustrated with that myself because I thought, how many times can I do this? And even someone I care about is kind of like, yeah, I hear it, but I also sort of don't hear it because I still am kind of gonna do my own thing. So I thought, you know what, I'm not gonna do that anymore. I'm not gonna just tell people and educate them and put all this effort into it if the reality is it's really hard to change people by lecturing to them.
Yeah.
It's really hard to change people by making them feel bad or making them feel shame about something they're doing. And after a while they might even, I'm not saying thank God, I'm not saying everybody does this, but some people might even start looking at it as like a what do you call it? A guilty pleasure kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Or
Like
challenge.
if you say, "Well, don't smoke," then a teenager is gonna go behind the house and smoke,
Right.
So I didn't wanna do that either, and I just like, I was talking I'll never forget this. I was talking to my best friend about what happened, with that argument I had, and she's like, "Well, even kindergarten teachers know that that's not how you change behavior." You don't change it by telling someone they're wrong or bad or telling them what to do. Like you change it by inspiring them and making it aspirational. It's like show the positive in what they could do. So, I mean, I'm not saying that I believe I'm 100% right in doing that. I think advocacy takes many forms and it's meant to and it needs to. I'm just saying that for me in that particular moment, I needed to shift the way I was doing it. And I just felt better thinking, well, maybe instead of being this person who's always reminding everybody of these like, you know, this bad thing that happened to my family and maybe it's bad for other people to do that. Maybe what I could do instead is I could show people, here's all of the benefits you're going to have from making a positive change in your life. Because I was doing that with my dad's bucket list already. And obviously, I'm someone who doesn't use their phone when they drive. And also, I thought, okay, people think being vegan is so terrible, but I have the ability here to demonstrate how wonderful it is and how empowering and amazing it is and how you're actually going to be better off for doing it. So really, it was just a moment of, to sum it up, it's a moment of be the change for me, I think.
I agree. I think that that's the only way to change people is to inspire them. How did it make you feel when you were living by your beliefs finally?
Free. Yeah, I feel that's the best way I can put it. It's actually in the subtitle of the book I'm writing. I do because I think maybe whether I was thinking about this earlier today, maybe whether a lot of people recognize it or not, I do think that there are a lot of people who don't like what happens to animals, don't are a little suspicious about maybe where their meat or dairy comes from, probably more often meat than dairy, um, and uh, and do have kind of mixed emotions about it, and like I did. And I just don't think it's a good idea to generally put something in your body if you have mixed emotions about it, because you're kind of digesting those emotions too. But yeah, I mean, I think I felt like, okay, well, if I am now 100% living by my beliefs, like my mother said, then I don't have any guilt about the choices I'm making. I feel like I'm being very conscious and putting a good deal of thought into these choices I'm making. Therefore, I have a voice. Therefore, because I really think also, if you remember, this was 2018 when I made this major life switch, and at that time we were living in some pretty like volatile politics going on, and it was a very tit for tat kind of situation all the time where we had the leader of our country always kind of calling people out on things if he didn't like what someone said about him. And it was sort of like we were in this sphere where nobody could ever really say anything because then if you did, your transgressions would be called out against
Yeah.
you. And it's really oppressive, I think, when people lead that way. And that just happened to be his style of leadership. But it had this unfortunate effect, I think, of almost homogenizing people, where it was sort of like, well, I better not even try to have a voice, because what if like this deep, dark secret is going to be brought out, and who am I to say anything? And I just think, you can't be afraid of stuff like that if it's something you feel in your heart to be true, and you see the benefits of it and you believe it could help other people, because you're just slowing down positive progress if you do that. So I felt great. I felt freer. I felt pure. Obviously the physical benefits, which I had no awareness of, but my skin was the best it had ever been. It still is, even though I was in my late 30s. My eyes suddenly were super clear. I mean, I already hadn't been drinking for a couple years, so I'm sure that had already started happening. But also, I had pretty bad IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, which is, just genetic in my family. I'd had that since my 20s, and that vanished. Like I would just get like bloating and cramps, and not to be TMI, but constipation. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden, I'm putting things in my body that I can digest that are right for me. So that helped. And yeah, it even helped me actually check off a list item from my dad's bucket list, which was the project I was doing. One of the list items was lose 4 inches from my waist. And my
Wow.
dad was always a little bit on the overweight side, so I feel like he'd be happy right now that that's how I'm describing it. He used to joke that he was 200 and blub pounds. That was how he would say it. He was always
Uh,
like wanting to diet all the time. I don't think he had the best eating habits in the world. And you know, I'm not surprised that that is a list item he was unable to check off, but I had been trying to do it for a little over a year at that point, very unsuccessfully. And all I did was switch to this diet. And really, just after, I want to say 8 months, I'd lost like about 20 pounds and had checked it off.
Now, did he have irritable bowel syndrome as well?
No, that's from my mom's side.
Oh,
But he did have an enlarged heart, and there are heart issues on that side of the family.
because, they always say that diets run in families.
Oh, that's interesting. As far as like cravings or things that you want, or just what you've been conditioned to like.
Usually as far as disease.
Okay.
Now, are there any beliefs that you are working on at this point that in order to live by your beliefs, or are you all done?
Will I ever be? I mean, no,
I don't think
I'm
anybody
not.
ever is.
I'm being modest, of course, but I mean, I think that day was when I really did feel, yeah, I mean, at least what I know about, at least, how can I say I'm living by my beliefs completely if there's still things in the world that maybe I don't know enough about to have a belief one way or another about
Sure.
yet, right? Um, but I've certainly, I mean, the best way I can explain it is like, I didn't make that decision for like holier than thou, like more, moral reasons. Like, oh, well, I just want to be better than everybody and say, oh, yeah, I live by my beliefs and you don't. Ha ha ha. Like that wasn't what it was. It was, you know, since starting my project to check off my father's bucket list 3 years ago, I just had to make a lot of life changes just for practical reasons, because I set a deadline for myself of 4 years to check off 54 items, which weirdly enough was the age he was when he died. Um, I've had that number show up a lot actually. Uh, but uh, but I just had to eliminate a lot of things from my life just for the sake of getting the list items done. So I think, anything else that I've removed, that does result in me feeling like, okay, yeah, I'm totally living by a belief I have now. I think it's been more accidental. It's been more like,
Hmm.
well, this has to go, because if I want to get to Vienna by December, then I can't spend this money on this thing or that thing. It's like it has changed my values, just by default.
What did you learn from the struggles that you had previously to going vegan? You mentioned that you had been pescatarian a couple of times and you had tried and all that. Did you learn anything? Was it a progression? I mean, I know that you said that you switched that day when you realized about your beliefs, but was there anything that you learned from that struggle as you were going through it?
Yeah, I'm a very emotional eater. Um, I have depression, and I don't know if that has anything to do with it or not, but I think in general, I don't want to say this is a global thing because I don't think it is. I think it's probably more of an American thing, but I think people today have a tendency to use food as a soother or just a substitute for something that could make them feel better. Like they turn to that instead. So I'm sure I did to that. I did that just as much as the next person. Um, so and I'm very sentimental. So I'm sure I had a lot of very sentimental attachments to certain foods. I know when I switched completely, I only went back twice, and once was for a Big Mac from McDonald's,
Hmm.
and once was for like that like croissant egg sandwich at Dunkin' Donuts. So, these little things that I would treat myself to on rare occasions that I knew were totally horrible for me. Like if I was stressed, that would be how I would cope. Like if I had a long night at work, when you work at a magazine, sometimes you're there until like midnight at a close. So that would be like how I would cope with being stressed. But it's interesting. One thing I think that actually really helped me through the change was something I did even like I don't know a couple years before it, which was I was editing the story at work where they talked about these women and this weight loss study where they had them sit there and write down for 15 minutes what their values were. And the women who had written that down at the end of the study had lost more weight than the
Hmm.
women who didn't do it. So I thought, well, hey, I'd like to lose some weight for my wedding, so why not? I mean, I'm sure that's what my thought process was. So I sat there and I started writing that, and I wasn't a runner yet, so I wasn't thinking in like a health
Yeah,
mindset.
right.
But I wrote down all of them, and boy, I'm so happy I did that. It was almost like a pre bucket list activity because it really has guided my choices since then. Because I think what they found happened was, psychologically speaking, if you take the time to do something like that and actually say to yourself, okay, here are the things I value, you feel full. Like you don't feel like you have any emptiness inside of you. Nothing's missing.
What?
Like it's almost like I know who I am.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's because we need that as human beings to have that, connection with faith, with God, or whatever it is for anybody. For me, it's God. We have a need for comfort, for security, for feeling like we're okay and we belong. And it's very difficult. Like, I mean, this kind of goes along with what I was saying before. I think it's so hard to say this is what I believe in. Like I'm gonna totally just say something about that, even if it's just on paper. It's really hard for some people. So I think making a statement like that, you're almost making a promise to yourself, like, okay, like inner child, I see you, I've got you.
Hmm.
Like I'm gonna pursue these things we care about, and I'm taking care of it. And when you do that, it's sort of like that's just, I think, in some ways, a really great first step into starting to live more intentionally and starting to make these kinds of conscious choices in your life because you sort of can train yourself to, if you feel stressed, I don't have to reach for the Big Mac. I
Hmm.
can just open this little notebook and look at this list I made. And that, I mean, that I really did lose weight after I'd made that list. But I mean, I've continued that process. I update it every couple of years.
Now, when you say that you went for the sentimental Big Mac, was that like? I'm
Make it sound
curious.
so great.
I'm curious because I'm wondering about the sentimental Big Mac, and I'm wondering if that was like a reward that like your parents gave you for doing
Yeah.
something well.
Yeah, well, not Big Mac, but McDonald's, and I mean, I grew
They
up
they
with,
wouldn't splurge for the Big Mac. That's why you'd go for
that was my introduction.
it.
No, actually, that happened because, you know, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's because of, I mean, because they gave us really healthy food when we were kids. So, I would say that I typically associate eating out with my dad or eating fast food with my dad because my parents divorced when I was 6. So my relationship with him really did happen over tables in restaurants. So that, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, but lots of kids of my generation were treated to Happy Meals all the time. It certainly wasn't a situation where they were like, "Oh, if you do this, we'll buy you ice cream," because they were pretty sensible in that way. And what, my mom is a guy, like she's retired now, but she was a guidance counselor, so she's like hyper aware of things like this.
Right.
But at the same time, I did have this thing happen when I was in college where so I had this one year where I was seeing this really bad doctor, and he was putting me on like a bunch of medicines I didn't need, which is something that happened to a lot of people around 2000 with the pharmaceutical industry. I've come to learn since then, but it affected my appetite and it affected, my cravings, and I would just like wake up every morning craving a Big Mac, like,
Wow.
and I was a pretty thin girl for most of my life, and I gained like 20 or 30 pounds in only a few months when just being on this one medication. I eventually was like, "Hey, I don't fit in my clothes anymore. Like, you got to take me off this thing." So he did, but I just really started this habit where I would stop at the drive-through. I was commuting to college from home at that point, so I would stop at the drive-through and get that every Friday. So I think that's where that came from for me.
Right. Yeah.
It's not good. It's like
No.
probably worst guilty pleasure foods you could have.
We'll see. Maybe they'll make a plant Big Mac sometime, and I'll have
Well,
one.
I can tell you my husband makes an amazing one, and cheap plug, if you go to Nut Free Vegan, you can find it.
There you go. Let's move on to your current venture. Let's move on to the bucket list, your father's list. How did this come about?
My brother found it when it was about 6 months after I got married, and he was a few weeks away from his own wedding, and we were visiting him in his new house that he had just bought. Like it was like his first condo, and we went up there to Massachusetts, and he said, "Oh, I have this little bag I've had of Dad's for 13 years, but I have never looked inside of it." And he opened it up, and because when they had moved, I think his fiance was saying you have to look at whatever's in there. So they found the list. It was like 3 pages of just these 60 items my dad had written down that he wanted to do in his life. It wasn't really a bucket list because he wrote it in 1978,
Right.
and that term didn't exist yet. So it just the things I would like to do in my lifetime. But he had kept it a secret. Nobody knew except my mom that it existed, and we realized when we were looking at it that he had actually been checking things off. So it wasn't something that he just like put away. He checked off like 5 items, and he marked one as having failed at. So I mean, I it was something where it was like the right place, right time situation. I mean, people ask me a lot why did I choose to go ahead and finish it for him? And it was just like, similar to the lightning bolt moment where Stephen was like, I've told you the science about factory farming. You have these moments of revelation in your life where it's a turning point and you could go one way or you could go another. And I felt everything was pointing towards, I have to do this. Even though, I had my own, I had my own reservations about my dad's goals in life
Mm.
when he was alive, and I used to think often, not as a kid. As a kid, he was my hero, but as a teenager, I sometimes would think he was a bit too much of a dreamer, or I wish that sometimes he could focus more energy on one particular thing for a longer period of time and not be so invested in so many different things that excited him. But I think one of the most important lessons for me in this 4-year journey I've been on now is that I needed to learn to embrace that part of him that, instead of looking at it as, well, why can't you just stick to one thing? I could have looked at it as, well, this is really cool because he's very versatile, and his interests are diverse, and he's creative, and he's really just not afraid to try anything new. And I'm like that as well, but that part of me was being repressed because I was afraid of being that way. And I totally think that actually starting to embrace that part of myself was part of what led to me going vegan, because I think we tend to have these fixed ideas about what things are if we're just standing on the outside of it. And if you actually are willing to try something, even if you just say, okay, well, I'm going to try being vegan for a month and see what happens. Like, there's nothing wrong with saying I'm going to do an experiment in my life. Like, this doesn't have to be a lifelong decision. So yeah, I think that really just entrepreneurial spirit that he had was something I needed to awaken in myself, among so many other things. So it's been such an incredibly fulfilling, just life affirming journey for me.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with changing your mind, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, it's sometimes, what you find out today changes your mind for tomorrow. I mean, you could find totally new information that you didn't even know about, and you can change your mind. So, getting to that, speaking to your point there about trying vegan for a month, you try it for a month. If you feel great, keep going. If you don't, then stop.
Yep. Do what's good for you. That's what I think. And like we were saying before, do what you believe in, because it's easy to discount the effect that has on you, but I think it really does. I think a lot of the choices we make are quite unconscious in our everyday world, because we live in a society, at least most of us do, of privilege and ease, where technology has made things so convenient for us. And it's almost to a point where like computers are making decisions for us now in a lot of ways. So it's very easy to forget that human component of, well, who's the driver here? Like who's the person who's actually choosing things. And my dad was a huge believer in that. That was like one of the tenets of his life. So I think because I'm looking at the world through that perspective of his list written in 1978, maybe I'm seeing it a little bit differently than I would otherwise. Yeah, I mean, and distracted driving is a great example of that. I think it's like, well, everybody's doing it. I mean, that's not true.
Right.
Smart people are not doing it, but I've heard people say that as an excuse, that somehow that makes this detrimental development in our society okay. And there's so many things like that now. I mean, and also like look at the whole mask wearing fiasco.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you have a big enough group of people that believes they don't have to do something, they're not going to do it, and they can easily justify it with, well, none of my friends or family are doing this. So I mean, I've really ventured away from the whole like groupthink influence by doing the list, and I think it's just opened me up to so many things.
You said there were 60 items. Can you share those with us, or some of those with us on the bucket list?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, my dad had a real variety. He was a real he was a real Renaissance man. So they go all over the place. One of them was grow a watermelon. One of them was plant an apple tree. I'm working on that now. Actually, the pandemic has been very conducive for planting apple trees because it's quite an investment of time. Um, and it's travel. Travel's big on it. London, we went to London, San Diego, New Orleans, St. Thomas. St. Thomas was fun because I felt like a real jet setter. And that
Hmm.
was like the last thing we did just before the pandemic. I actually went to the Super Bowl, which was one of them. And then the next morning we flew from Miami to St. Thomas, because what I try to do is combine the list items as much as I can, just for like, both time and financial reasons. A lot of sports activities. My dad was very athletic, so run 10 miles straight. That was the first one I did, but I was already a runner, so that helped with that. And swim the width of a river, surf in the Pacific Ocean. That was super fun. Ride a horse fast. Uh, and then there's sweet items too, like make my spouse feel happy, healthy, pretty, and young all the days of her life, which I just kind of modified with one word to apply to Stephen. That's an interesting thing because it's helped me actually with advising people in their relationships, because it's like, it seems to me people rarely think about, well, what if I just kind of set an intention for my spouse or my partner of how I envision them being, or how I would like them to be? Like, is there any benefit in doing that? Like, why not? Like, why not say, I value this, so I'm going to put my energy towards it. And that actually coincidentally was around the time I shifted to being vegan. Maybe not a coincidence, right?
Right. Why do you think he picked some of these things? I mean, they seem relatively unrelated, right? Grow a watermelon, plant an apple tree, go to St. Thomas, watch the Super Bowl, surf the Pacific. I mean, they seem kind of unrelated, but in a way, obviously they 100% are in his mind. Why do you think why do you think that they go together? I mean, horseback and St. Thomas I could get.
Yeah, well, San Diego ended up being sailed by myself because it turns out sailing is a big sport in San Diego. Um, I think he would write one, and then it would just like, he was a writer too and very creative. So one would probably inspire the next one. So if he wrote, for example, Go to the World Series, which was one he did actually check off, Then the next one in his mind was go to an NCAA final championship game. And then the next one would be go to the Rose Bowl. And the next one would be go to the Super Bowl. So it's like he's getting bigger and bigger
Right.
with the scope of what it is. One of my favorite series of list items is like the more money related ones. And my dad was never someone who you would say like, oh, this person's really great at keeping money around.
Mm-hmm.
But he had make money on the stock market. So like that was the first one, and that immediately leads to start a charitable fund. Because you can follow the thought process of, well, now he's thinking about what am I going to do with the money. And I do really appreciate that that was his first thought. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is give it away. And then right after that was things like win a scholarship for my daughter, because I was a baby when he wrote the list, so he was already thinking about that. Send my wife on $1,000 shopping spree, which I'm sure in 1978 was a big shopping spree. And then things like have a large house with our own land. So, drive a Corvette. So it's sort of like and own a black tux. So, because of course, if you've made money on the stock market, now you can own a black tux.
Yeah.
Like I could see the thought process in that. And I think sometimes, my dad was such a romantic guy that I can see him thinking of like, run 10 miles straight. And then of course, right after that is going to come swim the width of a river, which, why the width of a river? I don't know, but he probably thought it sounded great. And it sounded like poetic. So it's things like that sometimes too.
Can you take us back to the accident and what happened?
Yeah, we actually in the distracted driving world try to call them crashes just for the sake of sometimes when they say the word accident, it almost implies, there weren't any conscious choices made.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just was a freak of nature kind of thing that happened. But yeah, the crash, it was a teenage girl who was lost, and she at a red light picked up her phone to call like I think probably the place she was going to, like a family friend for help. And then she just drove right through the next red light, and he was turning left at that intersection. And I struggled with anger towards her for many years. I mean, I was only 25, and it changed my life completely when that happened. Because you just never ever think that something like that could happen to you. It's one of those things like, oh yeah, I know that happens, but I don't have to invest any time in that or learn about it because that's not going to happen to me, and until it does. And I actually, by the time I started doing my advocacy, which was maybe 10 years later, and that only really happened because I was working on a story about distracted driving at work. Like it just came across my desk and I thought, oh, I forgot about the phone. Maybe that had something to do with this. And then I just started calling people and offering my story to help with the cause. But I was actually recruited to go to a conference in Chicago where they taught us about what happens to your brain when you are using a phone. And I had no idea. I had no idea the science behind it at all. It makes sense to me now that I know it. But essentially, the part of your brain that is able to process moving images is the same part that processes auditory stimulation. So I feel like as someone who works in sound, you can probably relate to that to some degree.
Right.
And it's different. And people always say, well, what about someone being in the car with you, talking to you? And it's actually different because, in that situation, you're sort of both navigating together. You're in the same boat, so to speak. So they're going to stop talking, if something, some variable shows up.
So what about the music in the car? Is that the same type of thing?
It's not what they call it. The scientists call it a cognitive load. It's not the same cognitive load. So they were showing us all of these charts where they could show you, okay, here's what eating does. Here's what putting on makeup does. Here's what listening to music does. And, there was really seeing an influx of these distracted driving related incidents around the 2000s, around the late 2000s. I mean, my dad died in 2003, but, if it were true that music was just as bad as having this phone conversation while behind the wheel, then that would have always been happening.
Right.
And it was new. So obviously that isn't as much of a cognitive load. And, I know that what happens to people is when they do it, if you're on the phone and then like, you just keep on driving. And, when I was much younger, like I said, I didn't know anything about it. So I know what this feels like. I've done it as well. Um, there's something that happens to your brain when you do that, where you have like a blackout effect. So you don't know what you don't know, basically. Like you could have missed stop signs, you could have missed a billboard, you could have missed a street light. I mean, hopefully you're not. Hopefully you're present enough while you're driving that you do see these things. But and usually people can, I think, like gather themselves enough, but they're not aware of how much extra work it is to actually do that. And you're much more prone to making errors if your brain is too caught up in something like that. So, I mean, the way they tested it was essentially they put like microdes on people's heads and they could see where their eyes were going in the windshield. And eventually what they found out was, and it really didn't matter if it was hands-free or handheld. It was just what it was doing to your brain. It wasn't like whether you had your hand up to your head or not. So, I mean, that's a big misconception too. That's actually pretty detrimental. But what they found was that they were looking just like tunnel vision. So, like, instead of seeing everything through their windshield, they tended to be looking like right in the center of it. So, like, they were seeing about 25%. And then the rest was kind of like almost like they had blinders on, like they could still see it, but like fuzzier. So
Mm-hmm.
that was like terrifying to me when I learned that. Like I had ever like put myself in that situation or put other people in it. So I immediately forgave the teenager who did this when I learned that, 10 years later, just because I think she didn't know. I mean, how would she have known? And I remember her sitting there in the court saying the light was green. And I thought, oh God, why would you lie like that? But she probably wasn't. She probably genuinely believed that it was, because that was the last thing that registered in her brain because of what she was doing. Like it was just affecting her eyesight.
Can you take us back to that day that you heard about the crash? What was going through your mind at that moment?
It's very shocking when you get news like that. It's hard to even say what's going through your mind, except that you're just completely floored by it. I mean, I had actually, you know, I'd had a little bit of like a mystical experience right before it happened that I think sort of shielded me from the impact. I'd been on the subway and this stranger had sat down next to me, and like something wasn't right with him. like almost this feeling of like it was his first day in a body, or something. Like his veins were pulsing and like his eyes were super vibrant, and he just kept asking me, he's like, oh, are you okay, you seem sad. And again, I hadn't heard the news yet at all. I was just coming home from my work at a restaurant in New York City, which is where I was living at the time. And he just was like, I said, oh no, I'm just tired. And he started talking about how important it is to talk to your family and telling me to call my mom, and how he calls his mom. And, do you have any family in New York? If you do, you should call them. Wanting to know where I worked. I didn't really tell him because I was like, well, he's a stranger, but talking about being a security guard. There just were things happening. And then towards the end of the conversation, he said something very eerie that was like he knew something about me that nobody could know. Like, I think you know something about this, because it was like a secret I had. And then when he got off the train, I had this amazing feeling of peace wash over me, almost like that was an angel encounter I just had, because I was feeling when that person showed up very stressed about my life in the city because I had no money. I was like starving. And this guy showed up. So then I got off the train, and that was when I saw I had missed a call from my brother. And I called him back, and that was the news. And it's always been so strange to me. But the first thing I said when he told me was, oh my God, I know.
Wow.
It wasn't like, what? What, are you
Yeah.
kidding? That's what it was. And I think it's because, I mean, to this day, I mean, I don't really care what anybody says about this. I really do believe that was my dad checking on me,
Wow.
because he didn't know he knew I had a new job, but he didn't know where I worked. And he would say, call your mother, call your cousin. He would say all of those things. He even made a joke that my dad made all the time.
Really? What was that?
Oh, he was joking that he was 39. And this guy very clearly wasn't 39, because every birthday my dad had after turning 39 was his 39th birthday.
Wow, really?
He was a real comedian.
Yeah, that's
But that was the real telling thing, because I had never heard anybody else make that joke.
It's obviously very interesting that you had that experience.
Yeah, I've had so many since then that I don't discount it. I can't, because just the act of saying I'm going to do this list has just like it's just brought them all into my life. And I think part of it is because, when you're doing somebody else's list of life goals, you suddenly kind of want their input on it. So I've had moments where I'm asking my dad, "Well, how should I, what should I do with this?" And I'll get like in my back of my head, I'll see him maybe nodding yes or shaking his head no. My favorite is when I imagine that he's like hunching his shoulders, like I don't know, like this is you gotta figure out this one. But I have a vested interest in what he would think about things I'm doing in my life, and therefore I'm much more open to, for example, since I've started doing the list, I see hearts everywhere all the time. Like when before the pandemic, I would see them every day.
Wow.
And when I'm out running still, I see them. So I think it's a lot harder for them to show up when I'm in the house. But it always, to me, makes me feel like breadcrumbs, like I'm being told you're on the right path, keep going. And there's lots of little things like that. And then there's also very strange serendipitous things happen. Like, for example, when we met Jimmy Carter, that was for talk with the president, and just these little like timing things had to happen exactly right for us to actually make that happen. And to have an in to talk to him with like meeting the right person at the right time, at the right moment at the hotel. And then, one great example of this, I think, is when I checked off surf in the Pacific Ocean. That was one that Stephen really enjoyed. He was like really good at it. I was terrible at it. I had to do, I would say I probably fell off like 20 or 30 times and I tried 2 different times before I finally got it. But one of the things I did like, I like to research the items before I do them, as a good journalist would. And one of the ways I prepared for it was I finally watched the movie Point Break.
Oh, yeah.
And I had avoided it since I was a kid because it's my brother and my 3 stepbrothers' favorite movie. And, they just quote it like nonstop. So I was like, that's their thing. I don't need to watch that. So I watched it and I was astounded. Like, it's a really incredible movie, like underrated, really, really great. And after I finally successfully checked that one off, the first thing I did, of course, was text my brother and my 3 stepbrothers to tell them. And my brother sends me this little gif of Keanu Reeves at the end of the movie, saying to Patrick Swayze, "Vio con Dios," which means go with God, because he's about to, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but he's about to
Yeah.
surf the biggest wave of his life, as you know.
Yeah.
And really, that's the theme of that movie, right? Is do what you love, be passionate, make conscious choices in that way. And that's totally how my dad lived his life. So that night, I was really feeling kind of, I don't know, negligent of Steven, because we had done so many of these list items and all these trips for that whole year. And I said, okay, the rest of this trip in LA, like, we're going to do whatever you want. And he's like, great. And there was this vegan restaurant he really wanted to go to. And I was like, okay, fine, awesome, let's go there. So we walk in, we're there early, there's nobody in the place. And who walks into the restaurant?
Keanu Reeves. I don't
That's
know.
right.
There you go.
I mean, come on.
That's awesome.
You can't script that.
No, you can't. Can't make that stuff up.
It was so funny. I was holding this drink. I'm like, this drink it was like a pink vegan cocktail or mocktail. And I was like, should I take a picture of this? It's really pretty, like just joking about the fact that people are always taking the pictures of their drinks all the time. And he goes, no, but you should take a picture of that. And it turned around and there he was.
That's awesome. That's great.
I didn't bother him, but it was like, I do think that spiritually speaking, I've talked to other people about situations like that too. And there are things that can happen where our angels or whatever you want to call them can kind of make things happen at the right time, the right place.
Right. Now, which restaurant was that? Do you remember?
Yeah, it was Crossroads Kitchen.
Oh,
I think.
yeah. Crossroads Kitchen.
Yeah.
Great restaurant.
Yeah, it was funny because I posted the picture online later, And I guess he had been missing or something.
Hey, found him.
He had been like, hiding from paparazzi for a few weeks, and his fans were very worried about him. So they're like, "You found him."
You're like, I outed him. He's in Crossroads. Go get him.
And then I felt so terrible for doing it.
Okay, so where are you right now on the list?
I have 39 done, which is funny because we were just talking about that number.
Yeah.
And I have 15 left. And I extended my deadline by a year because of the pandemic.
Of the ones left, what excites you the most?
Oh boy, that's a really good question. I want to say buying the house, because we're still sort of formulating that. We rent still. I also kind of want to say Vienna, because that's the last travel location, and I imagine it will end there probably. But I have to say, write and have a few novels published excites me the most, because
Yeah.
that's the one that aligns the most with something I wanted to do anyway. And I've been working the most on that. That's taken the most out of me and is the hardest because I'm writing a book about this experience, and I hope to write more in the future. Um, so yeah, that one. And the only other one I really aligned with in that way was, I think we were talking about previously, was the tennis one. And I have to be really careful with those. I find when I feel like, oh, this is one I'm going to be good at.
Oh, really? Those are the ones you got to be careful for.
Yeah, this is one I'm gonna do this in a day, or yeah, I'm already a writer, I'm already a runner. Like this is gonna be fine. And it never is. It's because every list item by nature for some reason has a surprise. It's something I never expected it actually was gonna be. So
So what happened
with
with the tennis?
my husband's best friend, who was our best man at our wedding, is a tennis coach. And I thought, well, like the actual list item is beat a number one seed at tennis in a tournament.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was a really great tennis player. It makes sense that he would have wanted to do that. He had trophies and everything. And I thought for sure his friend was a number one. He was very good. Was a coach at like a country club, and we went out to play him. And I had gotten into a stupid argument with him about something that didn't even matter, like a couple months before, and I still hadn't let it go. And it was definitely coming out physically for me, in that like I was super bloated. Like I probably was just, I'd eaten something. I wasn't vegan yet. I'd eaten something bad maybe. And I was like, man, I'm too sick to even play. And this was my one opportunity, I thought, to really do this one. So Steven was playing with him instead. And, being the Aries that I am, I was kind of mad that I was missing out on,
Mm-hmm.
on doing it and getting competitive with them. And I was like, oh, it's okay. I can play. So I went out there, and I thought he was going to be easy on me, but he really wasn't.
He was like,
He was probably still a little mad at me
Uh-huh.
too. And I had no business with how sick I was feeling being out there. And I leaped for a backhand, which again I thought for sure I'd be fine doing backhand, because that used to be the position my dad used to compliment me on the most, that I had a really great backhand. So I leaped towards one, and I just felt this tear in my foot. It turned out to be a torn tendon in between two of my toes, and boy, it just turned into something so much bigger than I thought it was. Like I just ignored it for a couple months, and then I finally saw a podiatrist, and he said, "Yeah, you're gonna have to get this operated on." So that I think was probably the lowest point of the list experience.
Have you gotten had any other issues by doing the list?
Yeah, I have something horrible happen to me with every list.
Oh, really?
But usually it's silly. Usually it's like when I ran 10 miles straight, I'd never calculated, well, what if I need a bathroom? And I peed my pants for 8 miles.
Hmm.
No harm, no foul, but a little bruise on my ego.
Right? Something to remember your dad by.
Oh, he would have found that hilarious.
Exactly. That's what I mean.
And I did it to myself. I mean, I had so many oranges for that run, because it was in Los Angeles, and that's just what they were giving us. And I was like, I had a cough, and I was like, oh God, this cough's gonna, like, it was just too much worrying, too much preparation, and I ruined it for myself. But yeah, he would have found that funny. When I went skydiving, I threw up in midair.
Really?
Yeah, I think it was the adrenaline. And there's just something like when they pull that ripcord.
Is that
I don't.
common?
Yeah. Oh, and in fact, that is I was a tandem jumper. So the guy I was attached to worked there, and that was the first thing he said. It's very common.
Really?
Yeah.
Does it go up?
Yes. I don't know
Oh,
where it went.
that's what I mean. I mean, I don't know.
It's like, sorry, whoever's down there. Of course, some of it landed on me. It would have to. But
Sure.
the funny thing about that was, as I said, I try to check off two at once when I can. And I was trying to check off talk to a TV audience.
Throwing up in the air
No.
and
Skydive at least once and talk to a TV audience. And the TV reporter, like his news show was paying for the skydiving. So
oh,
I knew like and like a week before that, and this was like around a time when I was actually doing quite a number of TV interviews, because when I first started doing the list and writing about it, I wrote about it in Good Housekeeping where I was working. It just I had a lot of beginner's luck. I had a lot of attention coming towards it because I guess it was a new thing that someone was doing. And I had made a comment to Steven while checking my makeup, like, "Oh, it's so hard being camera ready all the time."
hmm.
He's like, I'm gonna pretend you didn't say that. So to me, it's like of course that's why I threw up. Of course that's why I'm gonna end up now when I land. This TV reporter will have a microphone in my face, and I'm gonna vomit on myself on television. That's so my dad's sense of humor. But
Oh,
no,
that's great.
nothing as bad as the torn tendon. That was really hard. But at the same time, taught me so much, actually improved my relationship because I had to let him help me because I literally couldn't walk to the bathroom alone. And, you know, um, helped me face my own demons, I think, of because I really felt like I wasn't working full time anymore. I'm stuck on this couch. I'm running out of money. Maybe this whole thing was a mistake. Maybe I'm gonna end up a silly dreamer like my dad, and everyone will say I told you so. So that was a tough moment for me, I think. But I think sometimes you have to reach a place where it's like you've lost everything, or you think you have, before you can summon the courage you need to keep going.
I agree 100% on that. Now, all you have to do is finish the book, right?
Yep.
Buy the house in Vienna. There you go.
Oh, maybe.
There you go.
That's an idea.
Now, what is one habit or hack that helps you stay on track with your plant-based diet?
I was thinking about that earlier today. My dad would say that I love being right about things. When I was a little kid, I would get in these stupid debates with my brother, and I would always say, "It's important that I'm right." Like I wouldn't let the debate go. So he would always say that to me. Oh, is it important that you're right? But I mean, to be totally honest, yeah, that probably is what it is. Because I set out to say, hey, I appreciate now that the act of, using your phone while you're driving. I mean, GPS is not a very heavy cognitive load, so I'm not saying that that's not safe. But feeling like you can't just wait to talk to someone. It's too much, and it's an act people do out of convenience, out of like this cult of busyness. And I connected the dots and thought, well, that's what veganism is too for me. I'm making a choice not to go vegan because I think it's inconvenient, or I think it's going to be uncomfortable. And I think, I'm sorry, what did you say? How did it stretch you?
No,
Or what are your hacks? What are your hacks?
hacks or
Yeah,
habits?
it's that, I think. It's just that when I set out to do something that I envision to be the right path, I will kind of do anything to make to make that come true.
Hmm.
I'm gonna train to be an Ironman. I want people to understand that you can be vegan and actually be stronger. That you can make this positive choice for the planet and for life and for animals that's compassionate without weakening yourself. So I'm, in that regard, that's my need to be vigilant about that is a big part of it for me. But other hacks, I think, Steven introduced me to a vegan Big Mac, and I was like, cool, this is great. I don't need the other one. I remember one thing I really struggled with is going to sound so silly, but on my first Easter where I couldn't find a vegan Cadbury egg, that was
Mm.
hard.
Hmm.
I was like, I just want a Cadbury egg. Like prowling the aisles of Whole Foods looking for a coconut-filled chocolate that could match it. So now I'll just order those on Etsy because they do make them. Like they do.
Right.
And And really, I think I turned vegan at a good time. Like when Steven did it, it was a lot harder. But when I did it, really, there's so many substitutes for the things that you love that really don't taste different. Um, and I'm always much more aware about restaurants now. Like, obviously where we live, we know what's vegan and what isn't. So we know where our favorite places are. But a lot of the list is interesting because so much of it is travel. So, for example, when we met Jimmy Carter, that was in a very small town in Georgia, and all Steven ate that weekend was like, home fries from Waffle House. So I didn't plan that one very well. But there's a funny thing when you become vegan yourself, you get a lot better at finding where the restaurants are. So we have to be kind of very good about our planning before we go anywhere. And it's nice when people are considerate about it and they say, we've picked out a restaurant that where you can eat things too. London was actually surprisingly great. They had so many vegan because veganism was invented there, so it made sense.
Yeah, I've been to London. It's fantastic for eating.
Oh my God, I had a vegan pizza at Pizza Hut. Not was Pizza Hut? No, maybe Papa John's. No, Pizza Hut. Yeah, a vegan pizza there. I was like, oh my God. But I am a healthy vegan. I'm not just eating junk food and Big Macs.
Right. Yeah, you get that Happy Cow app, and that'll hook you up for all the restaurants around. That's always a great app to have.
I think another good one is what Steven was really his mission, which is going to animal sanctuaries. That really affected me once I started going to them with him. And, for the reasons that he talks about, because it's just so different when you experience animals in that way. You don't like that disconnect of, well, that's like a chicken breast in the grocery store, this little shapeless like pink thing. And then there's an actual chicken. Like, I think as a society, we're so consumer driven that we don't think about, well, that's a life. And when you actually experience them in that way, it's like this animal is no different from my cat,
Right.
or my dog, and they have feelings, and who am I to say they might not have a soul? Like I don't, and what proof do we have that humans have souls?
Right.
Like I just think we often fall prey in our society to this very hierarchical type of thinking, like, well, I'm better than animals. Okay, well, who's better than you? And it's just like an objectification system that isn't natural. And then I think the other thing that happens a lot is, I'm not saying that people who need to eat animals shouldn't do it. I'm not going to proselytize in that way. But, I was reading the other day about how when the idea of eating animals started, infiltrating certain like agricultural societies, what they would do was they just would have these elaborate rituals around blessing the animal and thanking the animal for his life. And I mean, not just Native American, but, like Middle Eastern and other places.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the issue at hand, as far as like, why it's hard to just switch from what you've been told is the right thing to do, is because we don't have those kinds of rituals. We don't actually go out and kill the animal. We don't say anything to honor, like, thank you, God, for giving this animal's life. It's like the animal is just plastic or something. Like it's just an item that we bought that we deserve because we're humans and we're entitled to it.
Yeah.
So it's really changed my thinking about that in a lot of ways.
Now, what cookbook or book have you gifted the most to somebody transitioning to a plant-based diet?
I haven't really reached that point yet where I'm doing that. I will be gifting Steven's book when he writes it. I send everyone to Nut Free Vegan, which is his website. And I'm reading a really great book right now. It's called The Heretic's Feast, A History of Vegetarianism. So I would highly recommend that one because, I'm at the part where I kind of skipped over the Greeks and Romans. I want to go back to that because I know that was a big start of the idea, like Pythagoras, like the idea of being vegan. But I'm learning a lot about how the Bible has influenced the way we eat, why people seem to think that the Bible indicates that you're supposed to eat animals. And it's interesting to me, too, when you learn about people in the early 1800s who really weren't eating animals very much. Like we think of it as, well, this is how it's always been. I mean, it's similar to the wedding industry, I think. Like we do things without knowing why we do them. And it's not true that's how it's always been at all. And like I like to learn the history of anything if I'm going to do it. And to learn that some of my favorite writers, like Mary Shelley and her husband, Percy, were actually advocating for this for health reasons. And, George Bernard Shaw is a great example of that. Really smart people were saying you don't have to eat animals. And even the idea that, eating animals was once considered an activity of the wealthy is fascinating to me because, once we had the Industrial Revolution, it became a situation where everybody started having more access to eating animals. And the main reason for wanting to do it was no different than like, I want those sunglasses that my favorite celebrity is wearing. It's a status thing.
Right.
So that one's really great. I highly recommend it.
Finally, can you give me one word to describe how you felt before you became vegan and one word to describe how you feel now that you are vegan?
Asleep and awake.
True.
But not knowing I was asleep.
Yeah, that's interesting because you don't realize that you're not taking it in. It's kind of like the Matrix. Let's get back to our Keanu stuff here. But it is. It's kind of like the Matrix. You don't realize you're in it because you don't think about it. I know that for me, before I was vegan, I'd go to the store and I think I was doing the right thing. Or, when I was a kid, the dolphin safe tuna thing or whatever it was, you think you're doing the right thing, but you don't realize that you are asleep.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't really matter what you're talking about in life. I think ultimately the greatest happiness people tend to find is when they feel completely present in the moment in what they're doing. And I've been very fortunate in that by taking on this list of my dads, I'm often in these situations where it's like, okay, now I'm going to Georgia, now I'm going to LA, now I'm going to San Diego. Like, what do we plan for this? And what activity am I going to do there? And what do I need to learn about it? Who do I need to call? Like, what's the cheapest way to do this? That's always a big one.
Right.
But it forces me to be in this sort of not only planning mode like a person would plan a vacation just for fun, but rather learning mode. Like I'm really in this scholarly learning mode often over the past 4 years. And there's something about that really just has an effect on everything else that I do. In that it just has I don't know, like a domino effect. After a while, you just start living that way with all of your choices and all of your decisions. So I don't know. I don't know that I ever would have discovered that I wasn't doing that had I not taken this on. But I do think it explains a lot of the fulfillment I feel. And I don't know. I just think it's a preferable way to live because at least then, if someone questions you about a choice you're making, you can say, well, I actively thought about this.
Right. Right.
Like I did that on purpose. I meant to do that. as Urkel would say.
Yeah.
Or no, Huey Herman.
I meant to throw up on myself as I was parachuting.
Hey, it's great for the story.
It is a great story. You're right. It's such a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us here. Now, what's the best way for people to find you on social media and follow your work?
My website is myfatherslist.com. And my Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook are all at My Father's List. And I post from time to time just showing behind the scenes of the list, but the book is coming out in a couple years.
That's fantastic. I can't wait for it.
Thank you.
Thank you again. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. This was really fun.
Hope you are inspired by this story. And remember, it's never too late to plant your seed. Links to everything we talked about on the podcast can be found on Instagram at plant.yourseed in the show notes tab in the bio. If you enjoyed the show, remember to leave us a review. And until next time, thank you for listening.